Hey friends! Tonight we're stepping through a door that history tried very hard to shut. But behind that door, in the back alleys of ancient Rome, was a world as raw, real, and relentlessly human as any palace or battlefield. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you're into peeling back the layers of forgotten history. And if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, dim the lights, let the hum of your room fade to silence, and imagine this. You don't wake up so much as come to. Your head is pounding slightly from stale air, your back stiff from stone. You're lying in a box-sized room with no windows, no door, and no privacy. Just four walls and the slow drip of moisture from somewhere above. Welcome to your office, and your bedroom, and your entire world. You don't wake up so much as drift back into a thin layer of consciousness, slowly, like surfacing from wine-soaked dreams. It's not light that wakes you. There's none of that here. Not in this hole carved from stone. Just the stale taste of breath on your tongue and the dull ache in your back that reminds you this isn't a bed, it's a slab, straw-stuffed, flea-ridden, probably shared last night with someone who paid less than a loaf of bread and left behind nothing but his sandals and the scent of old wine. Your arms stretch and immediately knock against rough walls, close enough to scrape skin. One wrong twist, and you elbow the bucket, the one you try not to think about. The only piece of plumbing in this so-called room. There's no door, only a curtain that flutters with every footstep outside. A suggestion of privacy, nothing more. The room is barely bigger than a horse stall, yet it serves as both bedroom and workplace. A glorified broom closet where your life happens in shifts. This is home. You reach for the lamp, praying it's still there. It is, but it's empty. Again, oil costs money, and so does everything else. Light, it seems, is a luxury in a world built on shadows. You squint through the gloom, eyes adjusting to what little detail exists. In the corner lies your collections of treasured belongings. A chipped bronze mirror, a wooden comb missing half its teeth, and a bit of makeup that has more dust than color left in it. You touch them the way others touch heirlooms. These are your tools, your armor. The smell in the air is a mix of yesterday's wine, sweat, and the lingering echo of disappointment. Someone once told you Rome was a city of marble dreams. That might be true if you lived on the hills, wore gold, and never had to rinse your mouth with vinegar to mask the fact that water isn't safe. But down here, dreams don't reach. Only footsteps do, loud ones, soft ones, angry ones. Each passing step is a reminder. The world moves above you while you survive below. There's no concept of morning in a place with no windows, but your body knows the rhythm. You sit up, brushing straw from your skin, and begin the ritual that starts each day. First, the floor, swept with a reed broom that barely holds together. Dust, breadcrumbs, maybe a dropped coin if luck has finally decided to flirt with you. Then the mattress, patted down, reshaped, and silently cursed. You'll lie on it again tonight, pretending it doesn't hurt. Your joints crack as you stand. The bones don't lie. You're not new to this. But the world expects you to look like you are. You splash a bit of cold water on your face from a clay pot in the corner. Last night's leftover. No soap, just fingers, a cloth, and hope. You check the mirror, tilting it to catch what little light filters through the curtain, not because you expect beauty, but because presentation is everything. The bruises are fading, the eyes are less hollow today. That's something. Outside, you hear laughter, raucous, male, confident. Someone's already drunk, and it's barely past what you assume is dawn. Another voice follows, one you recognize. He never pays full price, but he brings friends who do. You mentally prepare yourself. The room doesn't give you time to settle. It demands you move, act, transform. This place isn't a sanctuary. It's a stage. Every item you touch is part of the transformation. The face powder, chalky and thin, clings to your fingers before it touches your skin. Rouge for the cheeks, a line of kohl beneath the eyes, drawn steady despite the shaking of your hand. The goal isn't to look rested, it's to look desirable, mysterious, not tired, never tired. Tired doesn't sell. And just as you smear the last trace of color across your lips, a voice calls from behind the curtain. A knock that doesn't wait for permission. The day has started. There's no time for questions, only the rhythm of necessity. One customer, then another. Sometimes polite, sometimes brutal, most often forgettable. Faces blur, but transactions don't. The sound of coins hitting the stone is the only music you're paid to hear. You count them quickly, hide them carefully, and never trust that they'll still be there tomorrow. At midday, if you're lucky, there's a moment of pause. You sit on the edge of the slab and pull your knees to your chest, resting your chin in the space between memory and numbness. Maybe you think of your childhood, maybe you don't. The past is a dangerous indulgence. You've learned that. But in this breath, in this stone cell with its heavy air and curtain that never fully closes, you let yourself wonder what it would be like to wake up somewhere else. Not because you believe it'll happen, just because the idea of it is enough to get you through the next knock at the door. Because in ancient Rome, if you were born a woman without status and luck never knew your name, this wasn't a punishment. It was just reality. And reality didn't come with ceilings tall enough to stand upright. It came with a bucket, a slab, and just enough strength to start again tomorrow. There's no mirror in Rome that shows you the truth, only the version of you that might earn a coin. And so, after you've swept away last night's ghosts and splashed enough water to rinse the ash from your face, the performance begins. Not on a stage, but in that tiny sliver of bronze that barely reflects, as though even it is embarrassed by what it sees. You lean close, too close, to catch your own eyes in the dim gleam of metal. The kohl goes on first, smudged beneath the eyes to give the illusion of drama, not exhaustion. Rouge comes next, applied with fingers stained from yesterday's attempts. A bit for the cheeks, a dab for the lips. The result isn't beauty, it's intention. You're not trying to look young, you're trying to look available, familiar, maybe even dangerous in the way that draws attention, but not blame. The chalky face powder is almost ceremonial. It goes on dry, cold, and ghost-like. It hides the uneven skin, the sleepless nights, the aftermath of cheap wine and cheaper hands. It transforms you into something other than tired, something like hope, but rehearsed, not real, never real. The smell of your perfume hits before you enter a room. It has to. Rome is a city that stinks of sweat, oil, wet wool, unwashed feet, and worse. So you counter it with strength, stronger than sweat, stronger than shame. The perfume is thick, oily, and cloying. It doesn't whisper seduction, it shouts it. but it's not for them. It's armor. If you smell powerful, you feel less breakable. You open your mouth and test the smile, the half smirk, slightly suggestive, but still amused enough to look like you're enjoying yourself. That smile is your sharpest tool. Clients don't come for truth, they come for the illusion that they matter. They want to believe you chose them, even if they know better. So you learn to nod at the right moment, to raise an eyebrow just enough, to widen your eyes like you're surprised, impressed, charmed. It's choreography, and it must be flawless. There was a day, years ago, maybe, when you thought your real face could sell itself. When your laugh was untrained, your flirtation clumsy but sincere. That didn't last. Not here, not in a city where everyone sells something and buyers expect polish. You learned quickly that sincerity doesn't make coin clink, performance does. The jewelry goes on next. Glass beads pretending to be gems, bronze that turns your skin green, loud earrings meant to sparkle in torchlight. You don't wear elegance, you wear visibility. You don't want to look refined, you want to look like someone who can't be ignored. And if that means looking a little scandalous, so be it. In Rome, scandal is a kind of advertising. The final step is posture. You straighten your back, even though it aches. You push your shoulders back, let your hips settle into the kind of sway that turns heads. You walk like your name is on everyone's lips, like the goddess Venus herself gave you her blessing. No one needs to know that your feet are blistered, your stomach half empty, and your heart somewhere you stopped visiting long ago. This mask, painted, perfumed, postured, isn't deception. It's survival. It's the difference between being chosen and being ignored, between eating and starving, between being treated like someone and being stepped over like gutter water. So you wear it proudly. You own it like it was yours from birth. And yet, somewhere behind the charcoal-lined eyes and the scented veil, the real you still flickers, quiet, watching, waiting for a moment when it might be safe to surface again. Not for money, not for a man, just for the simple relief of breathing without pretending. But that moment never comes, because just outside the curtain, another pair of boots scuffs the stone. Another voice slurs a request. Another transaction is about to begin. So you draw your lips into that perfect smile, half invitation, half defense, and you step into the role you've mastered better than any actor in the forum. Because in this world, the face that sells isn't the one you were born with. It's the one you painted this morning with steady hands and a heart trained not to tremble. There's no such thing as privacy when your bathwater is public property. Cleanliness in this city is not a solitary ritual, but a group performance, one you enter not for relaxation, but necessity. Because when your home has no drain, no faucet, and no space to stretch your arms without touching the wall, your best hope for hygiene lies in a shared basin, a cloud of steam, and the uncomfortable closeness of strangers. You leave your cellar early, draped in the simplest tunic you own, hair tied back, coins knotted in a cloth hidden beneath your belt. The street is already buzzing, vendors shouting, dogs barking, the sour smell of fish mingling with smoke from bakeries. You blend into the morning, just another shape moving through the city, headed toward the one place where being unclothed means you're doing something right. At the public fountain, there's already a crowd. Women with jugs, boys splashing, an older man rinsing what appears to be a goose. You wait your turn. There is no cue, just sharp elbows and practiced patience. When space opens up, you duck in, splash your face, and hope the water hasn't been used to rinse out someone's dinner. The quick wash is a gamble. Sometimes it's enough, just a rinse to scrub off the layer of dust, the sour tang of sweat, and last night's breath. If you're lucky, the water is fresh. If not, you swallow your pride, rinse your mouth with a sip of wine, and keep moving. But some days the grime feels thicker, the skin heavier, and your patience too thin. That's when you head to the baths. The Roman bathhouse isn't a spa, it's a war zone of noise, of heat, of flesh. You pay your fee, nod at the attendant, and undress in a room full of other women doing the same. No modesty here, just routine. Your clothes are tucked into a niche. Fingers crossed they'll still be there when you return. Theft isn't uncommon, but complaints are useless. The gods may see all, but they rarely intervene in missing sandals. The air inside the baths hits you like a wall, wet, heavy, and thick with smells both human and herbal. Steam rises in waves, wrapping around bare limbs and echoing with laughter, coughs, and the occasional shriek when someone slips. The floor is slick, the walls damp, and the sound never stops. Voices bounce off marble, off water, off bodies pressed close by space that was never meant for comfort. You find a spot near the tepidarium, a warm pool where the water is gray with use and slightly opaque. You try not to think about it. You lower yourself in, feel the sting of yesterday's scratches, the healing heat of shared water. There is no soap, but you have natron, a gritty, salty powder that scrubs skin and dignity in equal measure. You rub it into your arms, your legs, careful around bruises. It leaves your skin red, raw but cleaner than before. Next comes the strigil, a curved blade of metal used to scrape away sweat, oil, and whatever else clings to the body. It's not elegant, it's not gentle, but it works. And in a world without antiseptic, without medicine, it's one of the few things that gives you control over your own skin. You scrape, rinse, and try not to flinch when the woman beside you snorts and spits into the pool. The caldarium, the hot steam room, beckons. You step inside and are swallowed by heat. The air here is different, more private somehow, even though it's filled with people. The sweat comes fast, pouring from your pores like water from a cracked jug. You sit on the warm bench on legs tucked up and close your eyes. For a few minutes, no one speaks to you. For a few minutes, you aren't a product, a performance, a transaction. You are just a body, a breathing body. But even this moment ends. You exit, lightheaded, skin slick, and walk the narrow hallway to the frigidarium. The cold pool waits like a slap. You plunge in, gasping, biting back a curse. It wakes you, clears your head, stiffens your spine, and then it's done. You rise, step out, dripping, and pat yourself dry with a threadbare cloth. The ritual isn't complete without the final layer, perfume, again, because no matter how clean you feel, Rome isn't kind to the freshly scrubbed. You apply the scent like armor, layer by layer, until you can almost forget the smell of mildew and cheap natron. A little rouge to bring color back to your cheeks, kohl to reframe the eyes, and a quick glance in a fogged shard of glass confirms it. You're ready. You exit the bathhouse as you entered, wrapped in cloth, coins jingling, eyes forward. The street greets you with its usual chaos. But you're clean. For now. Until tonight. Until tomorrow. Until the next performance begins. Because in ancient Rome, bathing wasn't pleasure, it was preparation. And cleanliness wasn't a virtue, it was survival. In a city where water was shared, privacy was fiction, and judgment flowed thicker than soap, being clean meant you still had the strength to pretend. And that was enough to face another day. The difference between a respected woman and a walking invitation could be seen from across the street, and it wasn't in the eyes, or the voice, or the way she walked. It was in the fabric. In ancient Rome, your clothing didn't just cover you, it defined you. And for women like you, that definition was not left to interpretation. You don't choose the toga, it chooses you, or rather, the law does. Roman society, in all its polished hypocrisy, requires that women in your profession wear a very specific kind of toga, not the flowing, floor-length white drape of philosophers and senators, but a shorter, tighter, more revealing version. Cut to attract, dyed to shock, worn to inform, because in a city obsessed with order, morality, and appearance, your very existence had to be broadcast. The matron walks the forum in her stola, layered, modest, heavy with symbolism. It whispers of dowries and domestic virtue. Your toga, in contrast, shouts. Its color is loud, saffron, scarlet, sometimes even purple if you dared, and its fit is designed to draw eyes, not divert them. You walk through crowds like a living advertisement, not because you want to, because you're required to. The irony is rich. The toga, once a male garment of honor, is turned against you. They make you wear it to mark you as different, less, but it doesn't remove you from the streets. It plants you there, glowing under the Roman sun like a warning sign, or an invitation, depending on the man. It doesn't stop with cloth. The jewelry matters too. No gold, no pearls. Those are for women with family names and political connections. You wear bronze, glass, the occasional bit of bone, big, jangling earrings that catch the light and make sure no one mistakes you for anything else. Even your shoes are part of the message, sandals that click loudly, or bare feet that slap the stone with each step. There's no room for subtlety when your identity is a matter of state decorum. The worst part isn't the outfit, it's what it tells people they can say to you, do to you. The toga doesn't just identify you, it dehumanizes you. Once it's on your body, you stop being a person and start being an expectation. You see it in the way they look at you, not as if you're there, but as if you're an echo of something they think they own. You've heard the whispers, the laughs, the offers shouted like prices at a market. They wouldn't speak that way to a woman in a stola. But to you, you're not wearing dignity, you're wearing permission. And yet, you wear it anyway, because to take it off, to cover yourself as if you belong to the realm of the respectable, would be illegal. A stola is for the married, the pure, the Roman ideal. You, in your toga, exist outside that mythology. You are a necessary contradiction, tolerated, taxed, judged, displayed. Sometimes, you wonder what it would feel like to wear a stola, to have the weight of fabric speak protection instead of exposure, to walk into a temple and not be turned away by the guards. But then you remember, it's not the fabric that changes how they see you. It's the label they've already sewn into your name. Still, when you tie the belt around your waist and adjust the hem to just the right height, not too high, not too low, just enough to suggest, and not in rage. You look at yourself in the bronze mirror and see something they never will: strategy, control, a kind of defiant brilliance in the way you've turned their uniform into your tool. Because while they think they've marked you for shame, you know better. You know that every color, every shimmer, every swing of your hips down the street is not surrender. It's a warning, a flare, a declaration that you're still standing, still visible, still unbroken. In a city that hides its sins behind togas of respectability, yours may be the only truth walking free. The bronze mirror doesn't flatter, it accuses. Its surface is dull, scratched from years of hard fingers and harder mornings, but it reflects enough to show the essentials: eyes still open, face still whole, and something behind both that resembles readiness. That's all you need. Not beauty, not even freshness. Just the suggestion that you might still be worth looking at. You stare into it, adjusting your face like a mask. Because here, in this trade, the first thing you sell isn't your time or your body, it's your appearance. And not just any appearance, but one meticulously crafted to suggest possibility, intrigue, pleasure without consequence. A lie, in other words, told with powder and paint. You start with the eyes. They're swollen from lack of sleep, red from cheap wine, and framed by lashes heavy with dust. You drag the coal stick beneath each one, smudging it just enough to make the fatigue look intentional. Drama, they say, sells better than weariness. You've learned to exaggerate, to pull your features into sharper relief under torchlight and moonshadow. Make the eyes big, make the mouth soft, make everything else disappear. Next comes the rouge, red ochre, mixed with oil and applied with your fingers. The smell is sharp and earthy. You dab it onto your cheeks and lips, rubbing it in with practiced circles until you see color again. It's not meant to resemble a blush. It's meant to distract from the pallor, from the hunger, from the truth. Your hair, dark and stubborn, refuses to hold a curl. You twist it anyway, using heated bronze rods, and spit for setting. The ends sizzle. The smell is unmistakable, burnt, acrid, like hope left too close to a flame. If you're lucky, you have a wig, blonde, made from Gallic hair, foreign enough to suggest something exotic. The Roman taste for fantasy runs deep. You become the fantasy. Then come the trinkets. A chipped necklace of colored glass beads. Earrings that jingle when you tilt your head just right. A ring that once belonged to someone's grandmother, now pawned and passed down through too many hands to carry any meaning. You arrange them carefully, not because they're valuable, but because they sparkle. And sparkle means attention. Looking desirable isn't about looking good. It's about looking like you're worth the risk, worth the coin, worth stepping into a shadowy room and forgetting the world outside for the price of 2 dinars and a bad poem. You paint on that illusion layer by layer, like armor, like theater, like ritual. Sometimes your hands tremble, you steady them, and sometimes the coal smears unevenly. You fix it, because no one pays for hesitation. They pay for confidence, no matter how fake it is. You look into the mirror, tilt your head, and try a few expressions. The tired smile, the half laugh, the knowing look that says, I've seen everything, and nothing surprises me. And then, beneath it all, you catch a glimpse of something real. A flicker, a woman, not a product. But she vanishes quickly. The face you've built takes over. She always does. There are days when you wonder what it's like to be looked at with something other than transaction in someone's eyes. Not desire bought with coins, but interest that asks nothing in return. But that's not your reality. Here, being looked at is part of the job. Being seen, that's something else entirely. You finish the transformation, adjust the neckline, smooth the fabric, one last look. The woman in the mirror stares back. She is not tired. She is not afraid. She is ready. Because in ancient Rome, power doesn't always come from wealth or status. Sometimes it comes from a face painted with precision, a smile sharpened like a blade, a gaze that says, "Oh, you may use me, but you will never own me." In Rome, survival was a performance, and attention was the currency that came before coin. The city itself was loud, shouting vendors, clanging metal, the constant shuffle of sandals across stone. But to be noticed above that din, that was a skill. A Roman prostitute didn't wait for clients. She created them. She built herself into a brand before the word ever existed, carving reputation from noise, color, and cleverness. You begin with location. If you're lucky enough to work in a lupanar, you've already got foot traffic. Brothels are nestled like parasites between taverns and bathhouses, places where the blood runs warm, the heads run light, and decisions come quickly. You stand in the doorway, posture perfect, one shoulder tilted just enough to seem inviting, but not desperate. Your voice carries through the street, not shouting, not quite, but loud enough to curl around a passerby's ear. A promise in a single sentence, a price in a whisper. 2 asses. Quick, clean, and I won't bite, unless you pay extra. Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they sneer, but the ones who pause, those are the ones you catch. You lean forward slightly, let the light hit your cheek, flash a bit of bronze jewelry. It's all a dance, and you've rehearsed every step. If you're working freelance without a brothel's shelter, the game becomes more aggressive. You loiter where men linger, outside temples, near markets, beside fountains where the soldiers splash off yesterday's sweat. You offer a compliment, a question, a playful insult. You flirt like a gladiator, each smile a calculated blow. You watch his eyes. If they flick to your feet and back up to your face, he's interested. If they stay on your coins, walk away. He's poor, and poor won't feed you. Then there's the graffiti. You don't write it yourself, usually. Not unless you've got the chalk and the nerve, but you know how to get someone else to. A satisfied client, drunk enough to be sentimental, might carve your name into the wall near a tavern. Felicia, a soft hands, loud laugh. Another might scribble your rate next to a crude drawing of your figure. 2 coins, and she listens too. You don't mind the bad spelling. The walls of Pompeii speak more honestly than any senator ever did. And some women go further. They hire someone, a literate scribe or a clever slave, to write poetic nonsense about their talents on columns, doorways, even on temple steps. A little verse goes a long way when your market is drunk, bored, and easily led. Livia the Golden, worth every coin. Maritima sings when she smiles. Some pay extra for little drawings, not accurate but bold, eyes too big, hips too wide. But art was never about truth, it was about memory. And memory brought customers. There are whispers too, strategic ones. You sit in a bathhouse and chat just loudly enough for the woman beside you to hear. "Oh, that senator?" Yes, he visited. Very gentle, very generous. The words spread like steam. Tomorrow a man will approach you, not because he knows you, but because he's heard of you. You are a story now, a myth he wants to confirm. At the tavern, it's the same strategy. Pour the wine, laugh a little too long at the joke, brush the table with your fingertips. The man beside him notices. Maybe he asks your name. Maybe he just remembers your smile. Either way, you've planted the seed. Rome has no flyers, no posters. But its walls talk, and so do its people. You become an echo in their conversations, a rumor wrapped in perfume and gold-painted glass. You don't just sell pleasure, you sell the idea of it. You don't just market yourself, you multiply. In this city of gods and gossip, the difference between hunger and comfort is how well you're remembered. And if that means shouting through a curtain or flirting beside the altar of Venus, so be it. Your body is your trade. Your voice is your tool. Your name is your brand. Because long before marble statues and laurel wreaths, long before senators praised rhetoric and poets wrote odes, the women of Rome knew that to be heard, you had to speak louder than your shame, and to be chosen, you had to become unforgettable. In Rome, nothing is truly free, not love, not safety, not even the illusions of affection. And while the city teemed with statues of gods and speeches about virtue, behind closed curtains and in darkened corners, everything had a price, including you. There's no chart posted on the wall, no parchment detailing options and packages. Rates are fluid, like the wine they're negotiated over. They shift with your appearance, the hour, the crowd, the desperation on both sides of the transaction. For some, the price is high, silver coins that gleam like dignity. For others, it's bread still warm from the oven, or sandals, or a promise, already broken by the time it's spoken. For the women on the street, the going rate is often laughable. 1 or 2 asses, a coin so small it can barely buy a bowl of lentils. That's the price of a moment, of your body, of your time, and you take it because rent is due, because the bathhouse isn't free, because that corner of the cellar you call home doesn't refill itself with straw. So you smile and you accept the coin, even as it feels more like an insult than an income. Some men don't offer coins at all. They offer fruit, stale cheese, or a bottle of wine they swore was unopened. One particularly hopeful legionary once handed over a live chicken and called it a generous gift. You thanked him with a grin and sold the bird to the tavern that afternoon. Payment is payment, and in Rome, the gods don't feed you, clients do. But not all women worked for scraps. The high-end ones, the meretresses, played a different game. They wore better cloth, painted their eyes with steadier hands, spoke in softer tones and clever metaphors. Their clients weren't boys fresh from the barracks, but older men with rings on every finger and shame buried deep beneath perfume and poetry. These women charged in denarii, silver coins, heavier and more satisfying to hold. Some earned several per night, especially if they offered more than just physical comfort. A song, a verse, a whispered secret in perfect Latin. Education was rare, but those who could recite a line from Virgil or sing in Greek were considered luxurious. Sophistication added value, so did discretion. There were niches too. A woman might specialize in sailors, rough, lonely, quick to spend, or she might attract scholars, the kind who talk more than they touch, paying for a face that listens. Some offered exotic dances, others storytelling. One woman you knew used to hum lullabies during the act. Not sexy, but unforgettable, Regular clients sometimes paid in advance, reserving time like a merchant book space in the market. Others asked for credit, never a good idea. You learn to read the signs, the way they hesitate before reaching into their pouch, the way they talk about future plans and next time. There's no next time if they don't pay today, and there's no softness left for charity, not in your line of work. For the women under pimps or brothel owners, a cut, sometimes most of the profit, disappeared before their fingers ever touched the coin. The Lena or Leno took what they pleased, promised protection they rarely provided, and left you counting what was left, like it was treasure. Some nights, it barely covered your bath fee. And then there were those who earned nothing at all. The enslaved women. They didn't negotiate. They didn't set rates. They received no coins, just food, a thin mat to sleep on, and the promise, distant and cruel, that one day, maybe, they could save enough to buy their freedom. That if they were clever, lucky, or had the favor of a generous client, they might someday walk the streets of Rome, not as property, but as person. Rarely did it happen, but rarely was enough to keep hope alive. Roman matrons paid their dues with taxes and offerings at temples. Prostitutes paid with their bodies, their silence, their resilience, their ability to endure the worst and still greet the next man with a smile that didn't show the bruises beneath. Because in this empire of marble and law, where senators debated justice and poets sang of love, you knew the real exchange rate. One touch, one look, one act, all priced according to desperation. And no matter the coin, the cost was always you. Freedom in Rome was a word that tasted sweet but rarely passed your lips. You could speak of it in metaphor, dream of it in silence, but to chase it openly was dangerous, especially when your life belonged to someone else. Because in this city, not every woman who worked the streets, the brothels, the taverns did so by choice. Some were there by debt, some by force, and some because they had simply never known any other life. Slavery was everywhere. It wore many faces, some branded, some not, some with iron collars, others with polite chains made of obligation. If you were born into it, your body wasn't yours from the first breath. If you were sold into it, you remembered the moment everything changed. A hand around your wrist, a name crossed out, a price whispered like a sentence. In the brothel, the difference between free and enslaved was often invisible to the client. The curtain didn't care. The stone bed didn't ask, but you knew, the others knew. A free woman could say no, sometimes, could keep part of her coin, sometimes, could walk away if she dared. You, on the other hand, existed on someone else's ledger. You were an entry in an account book, a return on investment, nothing more. The pimp, the Leno, the Lena, controlled everything. Where you stood, what you wore, how much you charged. If a client was rough, it didn't matter. If he didn't pay, it didn't matter. Your job was to please, to perform, to survive, and to do it quietly. Complaints earned punishment, resistance earned worse. Some girls were sold young, barely women, taught to smile before they could read. Others fell into debt, a loan gone bad, a family tragedy, a false accusation, and found themselves offering their bodies to pay back what could never truly be repaid. Rome had laws, yes, but justice had a price, and you couldn't afford it. The idea of freedom became a kind of obsession. You counted every coin not as income, but as escape. You hid silver beneath the floorboards, in your sandals, even sewn into your tunic hem. One day you told yourself you'd have enough to buy your name back, enough to walk into a magistrate's office, slam the purse on the table, and declare yourself free. Legally, it was possible. Technically, the law allowed it. Emotionally, it felt as distant as the stars. Because the truth was, even freed women weren't truly free. The brand didn't fade, the gossip didn't stop. Your name remained stained, your history an open secret whispered in baths and markets. You couldn't marry a citizen. You couldn't own certain property. You could leave the brothel, but the brothel never really left you. Still, you dreamed. You dreamed of opening a small shop, perfumes maybe, or scented oils, something quiet, something dignified. You imagined sitting behind a counter, not a curtain, speaking to customers with respect in your voice, not fear. You thought of new clothes, a new name, a room with a window, a room where no one knocked without permission. Some women made it. You saw them sometimes, walking past the old haunts in better sandals, chin held higher. They never looked directly at you. Perhaps they couldn't bear to. Perhaps they didn't want to remember. Others never escaped. They worked until their backs gave out, their eyes faded, their usefulness gone. Then they were cast aside. No savings, no protection, no safety net. Just a tired body, a frayed memory, and the quiet shame of having survived without reward. But the dream persisted, because without it, you were nothing more than a shadow behind a curtain, a voice behind a painted smile. The hope of freedom, no matter how faint, was the only thing they couldn't tax, couldn't brand, couldn't take. And so you counted your coins, planned your lies, and practiced the story you'd tell the day you walked away. Because even in a city where truth was bought and sold, your story could still be yours, if you lived long enough to tell it. From the outside, a Roman brothel doesn't look like much, just another squat building wedged between a tavern and a bathhouse, its doorway barely wide enough for two men to pass. There's no sign, no sculpture of Venus above the lintel, no soft glow to suggest romance or mystery. But anyone who lives in Rome knows exactly what it is. You can tell by the way the guards smirk when they pass, or by the lingering scent of oil, wine, and desperation that leaks through the cracks in the stone. Inside, it's darker, always darker, the kind of dark that swallows noise and turns every sound into something it wasn't. Laughter becomes something sharper. Footsteps stretch like they belong to giants. You step through the main corridor, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the smell. Sweat, old perfume, mold on damp linen, candles that burn cheap fat. It clings to your tunic, your hair, your lungs. You learn not to notice it after the first week. You learn not to notice a lot of things. The hallway is narrow, lined with small doorways, curtains instead of doors, just thin fabric barely shielding what lies behind. Each room is a cell, no window, no lock. Inside, a stone bed raised from the ground like an altar to something forgotten. A mattress stuffed with straw, if you're lucky. A pillow, if you're very lucky. And if you're new, neither. There's no furniture, no decorations, nothing to suggest this space is meant for human use, just a place to lie down, or kneel, or sit, or pretend. The walls are carved with names, prices, symbols, and messages, some left by women, some by clients, some by drunk men with too much time and too little talent. Lucia fast and sweet. Maritima sang me a song. 1 coin, worth it. These aren't just graffiti, they're the Yelp reviews of the Empire. Every wall speaks, not in words, but in memories. Faint handprints, stains no one talks about, scratches on the stone from rings, belts, or nails. And always, always, the silence that follows once the curtain falls shut again. You don't work here alone. Each brothel has its cast, a handful of women, a few slaves, and the ever-present figure of the Leno or Len. The manager as the master, the one who handles money, discipline, and clients who forget the rules. They don't shout much, they don't need to. Their presence is enough. You hear their sandals before you see them, and you stand a little straighter when they enter the corridor. The other women are a mix, some quiet, some loud, some broken in ways they'll never explain. You share walls and stories. You whisper through curtains late at night when sleep won't come and the silence gets too loud. There are friendships sometimes, laughter sometimes, jealousy always. But what binds you isn't trust, it's proximity. You all survive in the same cage. Clients range from teenage boys with trembling hands to senators who bring their own wine and want to talk about philosophy. You smile, you nod, you pretend you care about their ideas. Sometimes it's easier to fake interest than fake passion. Between visits, you sit near the entrance, giving your best, practiced glance to anyone who lingers. 2 coins, you say. Quick, clean, no poetry. The regulars chuckle. The strangers hesitate. You've said the same line so many times, it no longer feels like a sentence, just a sound. The Leno passes through now and then, muttering about repairs that never come. The curtain rod creaks. The oil lamps flicker. No one really listens, because listening is dangerous. It means remembering, and remembering means feeling. The brothel never sleeps. Even when the clients stop knocking, there's movement. Someone cleaning, someone crying, someone humming to herself, too softly for anyone to call her out. The stone absorbs it all. It has no opinion, no shame, just weight. You wonder sometimes what the walls would say if they could talk, if they could spill the secrets whispered by soldiers, merchants, and aging poets, and the men who swore they'd return and never did. But maybe they already do speak, in the cracks, in the carvings, in the spaces between words. Because in this place, words aren't for memory. They're for marking, for warning, for reminding everyone who passes through someone lived here, someone worked here, someone endured, and though no statue will ever be built in your honor, your name remains scratched into plaster beside a drawing of a heart and a badly drawn hand. Faint, crooked, and eternal. They walk through the corridors like they built the place, but the only thing they ever built was fear. The Leno, the brothel keeper, the manager, the gatekeeper of someone else's survival, doesn't wear armor or carry a whip. They don't need to. Their authority is quieter, colder, and far more permanent. In Rome, they don't call them masters, but that's what they are. You hear their sandals before you see them, a slow, deliberate pace that echoes down the stone hallway. Not hurried, never hurried. A Leno doesn't rush for anyone, not a weeping girl, not an angry client, not even for the Edels, the city inspectors who pretend to uphold decency while making deals in whispers. When the Leno walks, the air shifts, conversations pause, curtains fall silent. They know everything. Who's working, who's sick, who bled on the floor last night, and who hasn't been paid in 3 days. They keep a mental ledger that never loses ink. Your body is just a row on that page. Your mood, your performance, your earning potential, they track it like a merchant tracks cargo. Some Linones are men, fat on stolen silver and wine too sweet for honesty. Some are women, former workers who learned that control paid better than pain. They call themselves madams, but titles are smoke. Alina can be kinder sometimes, but she'll still take her cut, still tell you to smile harder, still remind you what you owe, because you always owe. You owe for the roof, for the straw mattress, for the old oil lamp that flickers when you breathe too hard. You owe for protection from the guards, from violent clients, from hunger. The protection isn't always real. Sometimes it's just the illusion of safety wrapped in the threat of punishment. Miss a payment. You'll work longer. Fall ill. That's your problem. Complain. She'll remind you that someone younger is waiting to take your place, someone with better teeth and fewer bruises. And yet, the Leno doesn't lift a finger, doesn't stand in a doorway for hours, doesn't scrape natron into cracked skin or negotiate with a drunken sailor for 2 coins and a meal. They don't clean the floor or light the fires or repaint the makeup on a girl who's cried it off for the 3rd time that day. They manage. That's the word they use. As if it's a business, as if it's clean. Their job, they say, is to keep order. Make sure clients don't get too rough. Make sure girls don't steal from each other. Make sure the adults don't shut the place down. But what they really manage is pressure, constant quiet pressure. To perform, to endure, to obey. Some Linones believe in efficiency. They assign shifts, rotate rooms, track who earns what and when. They don't hit, not directly, but their silence can feel heavier than a slap. Others rule through chaos, setting girls against each other, feeding rumors, rewarding betrayal. Divide and conquer, an old trick, but effective. Trust dies fast in a house where everything is borrowed, especially hope. You watch them sometimes, the way they sit near the entrance, collecting coins with fingers that have never known labor. They smile when clients hand over extra. They scowl when someone complains. But mostly they watch, like a priest over sacrifices, ensuring the ritual continues. They tell themselves they're necessary, that without them, the girls would starve, be beaten, be thrown into the street. And maybe that's true, maybe. But it's a system built on dependence, deliberate, calculated dependence. Freedom is a story told to keep you obedient, a tale for those foolish enough to believe it still breathes behind these stone walls. And yet, some women become them. One day, they're behind the curtain. The next, they're giving the orders. Because after enough years, power is the only currency that matters. And if they can't leave the brothel, they might as well rush inside it. You look at them and wonder if they remember, if they feel the weight of what they've become, but their faces give nothing away. Only the coins clinking into their bowl offer any clue. One by one they stack them, proof of control, of survival, of ownership. Because in ancient Rome, the Leno didn't have to sell their body. They sold yours. And in doing so, they bought themselves a throne in a kingdom of shadows, built not on stone, but on silence. The tavern is louder than the brothel and far more dangerous. There are no curtains here, no designated rooms, no illusion of separation between what's for drinking and what's for touching. In a Roman tavern, everything is out in the open, the noise, the filth, the laughter, the hands that wander. And if you're one of the women working there, so are you. By day, the place smells of sour wine and boiled cabbage. By night, it adds sweat, smoke, and the unmistakable tension of men who've had too much and think too little. The tables are sticky, the floor is wet, and the air feels like it's been used too many times before. A tavern is chaos on purpose, because chaos makes people thirsty, and thirsty men spend. You don't just serve wine here, you become part of the menu. The moment you walk through the door with your tray and your practiced grin, you're balancing more than cups. You're balancing judgment, leering, and the thin line between teasing and violence. You have to flirt, but not encourage too much. Smile, but not provoke. Move fast, but never run. Running makes them chase. Some women work the front of the house, pouring wine and dropping hints. Others linger near the back, slipping into rooms with customers who've paid in advance or made it clear what they want. A few operate more casually, lap-sitting, whispered offers, hands sliding across shoulders as they pour another cup. Tips come in the form of coins, promises, and occasionally a chunk of bread wrapped in cloth. You take what you can. You take it fast. Unlike the brothel, there's no Leno here, no central figure keeping the books. But there's always someone in charge, usually the tavern keeper or his wife, watching from behind the bar with eyes that see everything and pretend to see nothing. They won't protect you, but they'll notice if you cost them coin. That's the only line you can't cross. Interfere with the profit, and you're out. The men are different here too, rowdier, less concerned with appearances, soldiers on leave, merchants with dice in their pockets, drunk poets who've mistaken your voice for inspiration. They yell over each other, boast about battles or business, argue about politics or gods they barely believe in. And when they reach for you, it's not behind a curtain, it's across a table in front of their friends, laughing like you're the punchline. You learn how to move, how to read the mood before it turns, how to slide away from a hand without starting a fight, how to use the room's noise like a shield. You learn to spot the men who are just lonely and the ones who are dangerous. You learn who tips well, who tells stories, who listens. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the night brings a moment of softness. A soldier who misses his wife, a merchant who pays double just to talk. You listen, you nod, you make the moment last long enough to survive until tomorrow. Because that's the job. Not just the selling of touch, but the illusions of attention. The pay in the tavern can be better. The risks are worse. No walls to hide behind, no regular clients, no consistency. One night, you earn enough to restock your perfume. The next, you're dodging a broken cup and wiping someone else's vomit off your tunic. You don't sleep here, not usually, but the smell of it follows you home, into your skin, your hair, your dreams. Still, the tavern has its advantages. You move, you watch, you stay alert. There's less waiting, more motion. You feel more alive here, if only because the threat never stops breathing down your neck. And so, you keep your tray balanced, your smile sharp, and your eyes open. Because in this house of wine and smoke, where pleasure is poured alongside vinegar, your worth is measured not just by what you offer, but how well you survive while offering it. The street is never still. It breathes like a living creature, hot, loud, and always hungry. And if the brothel is a cage and the tavern a storm, then the street is a battlefield without walls. Here, you are your own weapon, your own shield, your own escape route. You're alone, but not invisible. That's the trick. You have to be seen, but not caught. Desired, but not detained. Bold, but not foolish. There is no roof over your head, no curtain to pull shut. Your workplace is the entire city, its alleys, its arches, the steps of temples where the gods look away, pretending not to see what happens beneath their gaze. You stand where the men gather, by bathhouse doors slick with steam, near the markets where fingers handle fruit with the same intent they use on skin, outside theaters where the actors pretend and the audience craves something more real. You don't have a set schedule. You work when the light is low, when the crowds are thick, when the air hums with tension and boredom. You dress to be noticed, not elegant, not refined, but bright. Your tunic is shorter than decency allows, dyed in a color that doesn't whisper, it shouts. You wear beads in your hair, maybe a wig made of imported blonde curls, the kind Roman men associate with wild tribes and wild appetites. Your eyes are painted wide, your lips red, your sandals thin enough to flee in. There's a rhythm to the street, and you learn it like a song. The footfall of someone with coin sounds different than the shuffle of a beggar. You watch their hands, their eyes, their hesitation. You offer compliments like currency. Nice sandals, you say. That ring looks heavy. Need help spending? Sometimes it works. Sometimes you're ignored. Sometimes they stop. And when they do, your heartbeat stays even. You can't show eagerness, only invitation, only control. The clients vary wildly. Some are gentle, embarrassed, barely able to meet your eyes. Others act like they're doing you a favor, like touching you is a gift you should thank them for. The worst are the ones who smile too much. Those are the ones who hurt. You develop instincts like armor. You can smell danger from across the street. You know when to walk away, even if it costs you dinner. The biggest threat isn't always the men. It's the guards, the vigils, street watchers with the power to fine you, beat you, or drag you to the magistrate. Officially, you're allowed to work. Unofficially, they don't like it when you make them look, so you stay moving. You keep your distance. If one of them approaches, you smile, you flatter, you step backward, always backward, never turn your back. Some you bribe, some you charm, some just like to scare you. You learn which is which. There is no protection but your wits. Some women carry knives tucked into the folds of their tunics. Others make deals with tavern keepers or retired gladiators, protection in exchange for a cut. Some rely on luck, most rely on speed. You never drink while working. You never sit for too long. You never let a man walk behind you. The money comes in bursts. A few coins here, a stolen kiss that turns into a handful of copper, an unexpected gift from a foreign merchant who wanted company more than contact. You stash it in secret places, tied beneath your belt, hidden in the sole of your sandal, sewn into the hem of your tunic. There's no boss to take a cut, no Leno counting your earnings. But that also means there's no one to help when things go wrong. You sleep where you can, on the floor of a friend's cellar, curled in the corner of a bathhouse, under an awning if the weather allows. You wash in fountains, eat what you can afford, and dream when you're too tired not to. Freedom is real here. But so is hunger. The street doesn't remember you. It doesn't care if you're clever or kind or tired. It just wants motion. And if you can keep up, if you can stay visible without being vulnerable, if you can sell the illusion fast enough to buy another day, then maybe, just maybe, you'll make it. Because in Rome, to be a streetwalker isn't just a job. It's a performance, a gamble, a war, and every night you survive it. Every coin you hide, every danger you dodge is a quiet, burning victory they'll never write on a wall, but you'll carry in your bones. The brothel walls remember what Rome forgot. They don't rise high like triumphal arches or shine like marble statues, but they speak, and louder than any senator ever dared. Etched into stone, scratched by nail or blade or charcoal-stained fingers, these messages form the closest thing many women ever had to a biography. No parchment, no tomb, just a sentence left behind in plaster before someone else's body took its place on the same bed. They called it vandalism. The historians, the priests, the guardians of public virtue. But to you and women like you, it was something more. Proof. Proof that you were here, that you were seen, that someone once had a name for you that wasn't just a price or an insult. The graffiti came in many forms, and some were short and crude. Felicia, 2 coins, soft hands. Others tried for poetry, usually failing. Lupina kissed like Mars kissed battle. Some just named names. Maritima was here. And yet even those 3 words, simple, unadorned, carried weight. In a world where so many women's names vanished the moment they stopped earning, this was a form of survival. A line carved into time itself. Sometimes, clients left the marks, drunk, boastful, nostalgic. They carved out memories of a night, a face, a smell. They turned moments into stories, and stories into warnings or advertisements. She laughs, she bites, she's worth it. You could learn more about a brothel's reputation by its walls than by its attendants. No city inspector ever told the truth the way graffiti did. But not all the writing came from men. Some women, especially those who could read or knew someone who could, paid to have messages etched near doorways or along public walkways. These weren't just reviews, they were branding. Livia sings during, one read. Julia, 3 dinars, and you'll forget your wife. Another wrote simply, still here. That one stayed with you, not a sales pitch, just defiance, and there were warnings too. Scribbled in haste, half erased by time, don't trust the man with red shoes. She never paid her share, the Leno steals. You learn to read between the lines, to hear the fear behind the bravado, the pain behind the punchline, because beneath the surface, beneath the dirty jokes, the crooked drawings of figures locked in positions too ambitious to be practical, there's something honest, something raw, a voice, however small, in a city that worked so hard to silence it. Sometimes, women carved curses, so not elegant invocations to the gods, but rough pleas to the underworld. May her clients dry up. May his parts rot in vinegar. Scribbled into corners, hidden under layers of lime wash, they were spite given shape. Despair turned into ritual. You don't pray in temples when temples shut their doors on you. You carve into walls. You spit truth in stone. Years later, when the city fell quiet, when ash buried Pompeii and time moved on, it was these words that endured. Not the Senate records, not the speeches, but the scratches on the wall from women no one ever meant to remember. The historians called them graffiti. But they were memorials, social networks with no filters, diaries without locks, testimonies in rooms that never had windows. And while Rome may have forgotten their voices, the walls did not. Because even in a world that gave you no scroll, no tomb, no history, you could still write your name where someone would read it. And in doing so, you turned silence into story and erasure into echo. Rome had a way of branding what it wanted to use, but not respect. And few bore that contradiction more clearly than the women who sold affection for coin. The city, proud of its aqueducts, its philosophy, its justice, found no shame in taxing the bodies it otherwise pretended not to see. If you worked in pleasure, you paid for the privilege, literally. The state made sure of it. It began almost as a joke, a quiet humiliation, a special tax for those who traded in affection, something whispered through bureaucratic halls and snickered about behind closed doors. But as Rome expanded, as its appetite for both coin and control grew, what began as mockery hardened into policy. Emperor Augustus, champion of morals, patron of public virtue, turned regulation into legislation. He called it a reform. For the women it affected, it felt more like a leash. If you worked as a prostitute, whether in a brothel, a tavern, or the open street, you had to register. Not just your name, your details, your status, your address. You became a line in a state document, a walking file number. It was called the vecticle, a tax on vice, but the state called it something more elegant, a contribution from those who made their living by the body, as if that phrasing somehow softened the insult. You had to pay regularly, either directly or through the Leno, who took his cut and passed on your dues with his own profit attached. If you were caught unregistered, the penalties could be harsh: fines, forced registration, even exile from the city. The law didn't care whether you'd entered the profession by choice or been pushed into it by debt or chains. If you worked, you paid. End of story. But here was the cruelest part. Registration didn't come with rights. You were now on a list, officially recognized by the empire. But that recognition was hollow. It didn't protect you from violence, from mistreatment, from theft, or exploitation. You couldn't appeal to the courts the way a Roman matron could. If a client beat you, you took it. If a Leno cheated you, you endured it. The law only looked in your direction when it wanted money or wanted to make an example. The records branded you for life. Even if you left the trade, even if you married or opened a business, your name remained. Some tried to erase their registration, to disappear from the rolls. A few succeeded, often with bribes or powerful patrons. Most didn't. A girl could climb her way out of the cellar, but she'd carry the label with her, like a stain baked into the skin. Worse still, the tax was regressive. The poorer you were, the harder it bit. A high-end courtesan, pampered by senators, could absorb the cost. A streetwalker trading favors for food often paid the same amount, or more, because she had no one to bargain on her behalf. And while men who frequented prostitutes faced no taxation, no registration, no shame, the women they visited were marked by the very system that encouraged their existence. Some saw it as necessary. Rome was always looking for new revenue, but others quietly saw the truth. It was punishment disguised as policy. A way to remind you that your body didn't just belong to you, it belonged to Rome, and Rome would collect its share. In time, the tax became just another fact of life, like the cracked walls of the brothel or the way your name was shouted across a forum. You learned to budget for it, to resent it, to laugh bitterly when some merchant complained about tariffs on olive oil. At least his trade wasn't listed in a city ledger under women and other goods. There was no revolution, no uprising, no grand moment when the taxed stood up and refused, just quiet endurance, just names etched into walls and ledgers and memory. Women who worked, paid, and lived under a system that saw them not as citizens, not as daughters, not even as workers, but as income streams. And through it all, they survived. Because in a city where justice wore a toga and compassion was optional, paying the tax meant you were still breathing, still standing, still in the game, even if the rules were written against you. In Rome, legality wasn't the same as dignity. The law might tolerate your body, might tax it, record it, regulate it, but it never protected it. It never honored it. It simply accepted it the way it accepted sewage in the streets, necessary, unpleasant, and best ignored unless it overflowed. To be a prostitute in Rome was to live at the intersection of permission and contempt. The state allowed you. Society did not. This was the contradiction you lived with every day. You were doing nothing illegal. You weren't stealing or killing or starting fires in the forum. And yet you were still treated like filth, not by clients. They came willingly, often eagerly, but by the wives of those clients, by the shopkeepers who watched you pass, by the magistrates who pocketed your taxes while refusing your complaints. Rome's laws were pragmatic. They acknowledged desire as part of life, even of politics. Men, especially powerful men, had needs, and those needs required outlets. Better to keep them contained, the logic went, than have them spilling over into scandal. So prostitution wasn't outlawed. It was regulated, branded, taxed, labeled as a service, like tanning or baking. But while the baker could hold his head high, the woman who warmed a senator's bed was expected to keep her eyes low. No one ever said it out loud, but the double standard was everywhere. A man could sleep with you and then walk past you the next day like you were a shadow. A married man could visit your room and then attend temple with his wife as if nothing happened. If you tried to speak of the visit, if you dared to make it public, suddenly you weren't a service provider. You were a threat, a liar, a seductress who tried to ruin a respectable man's life. The more powerful your client, the more dangerous it was to name him. And then there were the laws about clothing. You had to wear the toga, a short, bright, unmistakable version of what Roman men wore in court. For respectable women, the toga was forbidden. It was a garment of male citizenship, of public voice. But for you, it was mandatory. A cruel joke, really. Rome gave you a costume that mocked both femininity and authority. It said, you may be visible, but never respected. Respectable Roman women wore the stola, a modest drape of cloth that signaled virtue and obedience. It swayed gently, whispered tradition. Your toga shouted exposure. You were told how to dress, how to stand, where to work. You were controlled by law and shamed by culture. Morality was wielded like a club by those who broke it in private. The same senators who passed decrees about family values kept stables of enslaved girls in country villas. The same priests who praised chastity visited the temples late at night, where sacred prostitution blurred the line between prayer and transaction. It wasn't hypocrisy, it was design. A system built to shield one class and strip another. You couldn't attend public rituals as an equal. You couldn't marry a citizen. You couldn't leave behind a legacy in your own name. And yet the empire depended on you, not just for pleasure, but for control. Your presence allowed elite women to remain untouched. Your labor kept frustrated soldiers from rioting. Your suffering was the cost of someone else's comfort. Still, Rome didn't call you a criminal. That would have been honest. Instead, they called you a necessity. It was the oldest lie of all, that your work was tolerated, even needed, but that you were the one to blame. You were the corrupter, the symptom, the danger that decent men had to resist. But you knew the truth. You knew who came knocking after midnight. You knew who slipped coins under their cloaks and returned again and again with eyes full of need and mouths full of denial. You knew who the real liars were. And so you walked through the city, dressed in legality and dripping with shame that wasn't yours. You paid your taxes. You survived their judgments. You watched them write laws with one hand and tear them down with the other. And you wondered, not for the first time, how a city that built its glory on order and reason could be so deeply dishonest about the one thing it wanted most, but would never admit needing. You. They stood in the forum by daylight, cloaked in dignity and conviction, their words oiled with virtue. They spoke of family values, of the sanctity of Roman matrons, of the need for moral reform. And the crowd listened, nods, applause, agreements muttered like prayers. But the brothels knew better. The curtains whispered the truth. The stone walls, smeared with years of sweat and lies, remembered the faces behind the masks. Rome's political class loved a good sermon. The Senate was filled with men who claimed to defend Roman tradition, stoicism, temperance, discipline. They passed laws regulating affection, outlawing excess, and promoting marriage and fertility. But when the torches dimmed and the city softened under moonlight, those same men slipped into side streets with cloaks drawn low and coins clutched tightly in rings of silence. They came to the brothels not as orators, but as beggars, not as judges, but as addicts, and they paid well because hypocrisy always costs extra. The Lenones welcomed them with polished smiles. These were the customers who tipped generously, requested privacy, and threatened loudly if recognized. The girls were warned not to speak their names aloud, not to look too long, not to laugh. A senator in a brothel was not a man among equals. He was a storm to be weathered. One wrong glance could end your night or your life. And yet they came, night after night, sometimes alone, sometimes with companions who jeered and bragged. Their words in the forum carried the weight of law. But here, between the stone walls and oil lamps, they were just men, greedy, frightened, hungry for something that power could not grant. Rome, of course, noticed. The poets noticed most of all. Satirists like Juvenal, Martial, and Horace became the unfiltered voice of the street. They didn't write laws. They wrote what the laws pretended not to see. They laced their verses with venom and laughter, exposing the gap between what Rome claimed to be and what it really was. No one escaped their scrutiny, not the generals, not the priests, not the censors who called for purity, with mouths still tasting of the night before. Juvenal scoffed at virtue sold by the hour. Martial mocked senators who banned theater actors from marrying citizens but married their own mistresses behind closed doors. Horace, more amused than angry, saw the city as a stage play, everyone acting, everyone pretending, everyone hoping the audience wouldn't notice the script had holes. Even the emperor wasn't safe. Rumors wrapped themselves around palaces like ivy, whispers of courtesans in silk slipping through back doors, of orgies disguised as religious festivals, of high priests who confessed more with their hands than their prayers. The higher a man climbed, the more his shadow grew, and Rome's satirists knew exactly where to shine the lamp. The brothels heard the jokes first. The women laughed behind curtains at verses they couldn't read but understood instinctively. They were the punchlines and the prophets. They knew which clients deserved to be mocked and which would have a slave whipped for speaking out of turn. Still, the hypocrisy served a purpose. It kept Rome's machinery running. Public morality kept wives loyal, kept soldiers obedient, kept slaves afraid. But private vice, hidden, denied, but always present, gave the elite release, a place to unravel without consequence. It was a pressure valve, a secret door out of a golden cage. And the irony was never lost on the women who served them, because in the end, it was their bodies that upheld the illusion. Their silence that allowed speeches to continue, their laughter that echoed after the lies faded. They were the truth Rome couldn't write into law, but couldn't live without. So let them speak their sermons. Let them ban lust in the daylight and drown in it after dark. Let the poets write. Let the jokes sting. The brothel would be there long after the Senate fell silent, walls soaked in secrets, floors paved in contradiction. Because in Rome, virtue wore a mask. But the streets always remembered the face behind it. Pain was a constant, like hunger, like noise, like breath. It came in waves, sometimes dull and deep, sometimes sharp enough to make your knees buckle. But in the brothels and on the streets of Rome, you learned not to flinch. You couldn't. Pain was part of the job, and the job never stopped. There were no doctors here, not the kind with scrolls and reputations, not the men who treated senators with imported herbs, or who traced symptoms in wax tablets while sipping wine. The women of Rome's underworld had only each other and whatever knowledge they could piece together from whispers, guesses, and survival. When infection set in, it wasn't a question of if, it was how bad and how long. Cuts that never healed properly, rashes that spread, aching hips, bruised thighs, inflamed skin that burned even under the lightest linen. There was no clean water, no soap, not in the modern sense. You used vinegar if you had it, urine if you didn't. Ashes from the hearth rubbed into wounds, hoping it would draw out the sickness. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Discomfort became your baseline. You worked through it. You smiled through it. You leaned against walls when standing felt like breaking. There were nights you bit your lip hard enough to taste blood, just to avoid screaming when the weight pressed down and everything inside burned. The worst were the infections you couldn't see, the ones that crept up inside you, quiet at first, a fever, a cramp. Then blood where it shouldn't be, then nothing, then more blood. You didn't talk about it, not out loud, because there was nothing to be done. The body that earned your coin was also the body that turned against you, and there was no cure waiting in the wings. No priest would bless you, no temple healer would touch you, so you turned to each other. There were always older women, those who had survived long enough to learn the rhythms of the body like a second language. They knew what herbs might help with swelling, what oils soothed burning, which roots to chew, and which to bury under the moon. They weren't trained physicians, but they were doctors in all the ways that mattered. When you were curled on the floor, shaking, someone held your hand. When the bleeding wouldn't stop, someone sat beside you through the night with wet cloth and silent prayers. Knowledge passed from one aching body to another. Remedies scribbled in memory, measured in pinches, whispered with urgency. You'd learn too. You had to. You learned which smells meant danger, which aches meant rest, which clients to avoid, which wounds would leave scars. You became your own healer, your own nurse, your own only hope. And still, the work went on. The Leno didn't care if you were limping, if your back spasmed, if your voice cracked from fever. As long as the coin came in, your health was your own burden. If you were too ill to perform, you lost your place. Someone else would take it. There were always more girls, always. Some turned to herbs for more than healing. Certain mixtures, taken at the right time, might stop the body from carrying a client's legacy. They weren't safe, they weren't always effective, but they were often the only choice. The empire might control your name and your taxes, but it had no say in what you drank in secret, what roots you boiled in desperation. And sometimes, even that failed. There were stories, always stories, of women who didn't wake up, who bled too long, who screamed once and were silent the next day. No burial, no mourning, just an empty corner and a whisper. She's gone. And the work continued because it had to. You learned not to cry in front of clients, not to limp too visibly, not to flinch when the pain spiked. You learned how to fake laughter when your body screamed. You became a master of illusion, of health, of pleasure, of strength, because the truth wouldn't earn you coin, and coin was what kept you alive. But in the dark, when the brothel quieted, when the candles burned low, and the pain had no more places to hide, that's when you allowed the truth to surface, that you were exhausted, that you were wounded, that healing wasn't just a physical act. It was survival against silence, neglect, and the lie that your suffering didn't matter. You weren't just a worker, you were your own medicine. And sometimes, in the rare moments when a hand reached out, not to take, but to hold, you remembered you were still human beneath all the scars, still alive, still fighting. In a world where men held the laws and money dictated mercy, the gods were the only ones who might listen without asking for something in return. And even that was uncertain. But for women living on the edge of Roman society, for those selling touch, illusion, and fragments of themselves, faith was more than a custom. It was a lifeline, a whispered bargain in the dark, a silent hope carved into the cracks of stone walls and clutched in the palm like a weapon. You didn't need a priest to find a god. You carried your own. Around your neck, a tiny figure of Venus worn smooth from kisses. In your sandal, a charm wrapped in cloth and string. Hanging by the oil lamp above your bed, a clay amulet scrawled with symbols no magistrate would recognize, but every girl in the house believed in. These weren't decorations. They were shields against sickness, against sorrow, against the hands that sometimes didn't stop when you begged. Venus was the goddess you turned to first. Not the Venus of noble poetry or marble perfection, but the earthier version, the Venus of taverns and perfume, of laughter and shadowed eyes. You offered her honey, bits of bread, scraps of saffron when you could afford it, not because you believed she'd make life easier, but because not asking felt like tempting fate. She understood you, perhaps. She, too, lived at the edge of desire and judgment. You lit candles to her image. You murmured her name before each night's first knock. But Venus wasn't the only name on your lips. Some prayed to Fortuna, the bringer of chance, asking for a kind client or a lucky escape. Others whispered to the Lares, the household spirits, and left crumbs in corners or splashed wine on the floor in tribute. You never knew which spirit might be watching. Better to honor them all. And then there were those who didn't pray, but cursed. It wasn't uncommon for jealousy to spark behind thin curtains. Another woman stealing your regular, or undercutting your price, or simply laughing too loudly when you were bleeding inside. You couldn't confront her, not directly. The Leno forbade fights, so you turned to magic, to the dark spaces between belief and vengeance. Curses were written on thin sheets of lead, curled tight like secrets, then buried in graves or tossed into sewers. They were called deficciones, binding spells. May her beauty fade, one might say. May her voice crack. May she bleed and lose favor. It wasn't about hatred. It was about survival. If a rival took your income, she took your food, your rent, your safety. Magic leveled the field in a world where fists and laws favored others. Witches were whispered about, too. Older women who lived outside the city walls, with knowledge of roots and blood and time. You might visit them in secret, hoping for a salve, a charm, a whispered spell. Some warned that such women made bargains with darker forces. But if your nights were already filled with pain and ghosts, what difference did it make? Everything could be ritual. Lighting a lamp a certain way, drawing a sign on the wall before work, avoiding certain foods on certain days. You weren't superstitious. You were cautious. You lived in a world that didn't protect you, so you made your own protection, however fragile, however strange. Some of the girls carved their own gods, not ones found in temples, but small idols shaped from clay or wax, personalized with beads or bits of fabric. They named them things no one else understood. They prayed to them in moments of silence, like children clinging to old toys. Not for miracles, just for one more safe night. Religion was everywhere in Rome, in ceremonies, in politics, in temples glittering with donations from the very men who condemned your work. But for you, faith wasn't ceremony. It was intimate, secret, urgent. You didn't pray for wealth. You prayed to stop bleeding. You didn't ask for power. You asked to survive. And you did it not once, but every day. You learned that prayer could be resistance, that ritual could be control, that even if your body belonged to others, your spirit could still kneel where you chose, light candles only you understood, and speak to gods who might, just might, be listening. Because in the brothel, on the street, in the cold corner of a shared room, the gods weren't found in temples. They were carved in bone, sung in whispers, burned in the smoke of a cheap lamp. And if they answered, it wasn't with thunder or miracles. It was with silence, with survival, with one more day. It always started the same way, with softness, not in the touch, not in the words, but in the eyes. That slight hesitation, the glance that lingered too long, The way a man sat differently at the edge of the bed, like he didn't come for what he paid for. You recognized it the moment it happened. The shift, the mistake, the illusion taking root. He wasn't just here for pleasure. He thought he was here for something real, love, or something that wore its mask. You'd seen it before dozens of times, from young soldiers with trembling hands to graying merchants desperate to be seen. It wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it came quietly, like a gift you didn't want. A flower left on your table, a coin pressed into your hand with a whisper that meant nothing and everything. Only you. The problem wasn't that they felt something. The problem was that they expected you to feel it back. You learned how to manage it, how to tilt your head just enough, how to let your voice drop when you said their name, how to give the illusion weight, because illusion was your trade, more than touch and more than skin. You sold the maybe, the almost, the dream they carried back to their homes and wives and respectable lives. And if they fell too deep, you helped them drown gently. But sometimes it worked the other way. A man came too often, spoke too softly, lingered after, brought you news from the street, warm bread, coins wrapped in cloth, not just for the night, but for you. You tried to laugh it off. You reminded yourself he was a client, that this wasn't real, that you couldn't afford real. But your heart didn't listen to reason. There were nights you caught yourself waiting for his knock, watching the door between visits, smiling before you meant to. You hated that smile. You hated how your chest ached when he left something behind. A scarf, a word, a promise. Because you knew better. You'd seen how this story ended. Love didn't survive in places like this. It couldn't, because even when it bloomed, it had no room to grow. A woman like you was never going to marry a man like him, even if he wanted to, even if he said it out loud. The law forbade it. Society sneered at it. And behind the fantasy, there was always the fact that he paid. No matter how gentle, no matter how kind, the coins still clinked on the table. So you played your part. You gave him affection without surrender. You let him believe. Sometimes you almost did too. You imagined a different life, a small house on the edge of the city. No more clients, no more bruises, just quiet, just warmth, just him. The dream was so vivid you could taste it. And then it passed, because one day he stopped coming. They always did. Maybe his wife found out. Maybe he left for war. Maybe he simply woke up and remembered what you were. Not a lover, not a partner, a purchase. You didn't cry, not where anyone could see. You folded the scarf. You tucked the coins into the floor crack. You whispered a name once just to let it go. Because in your world, feelings had a price. And love, true love, was the most expensive illusion of all, not because it cost the most, but because it cost everything. You learned again that affection was part of the performance, that even the ache in your chest could be rehearsed, that nothing, not even hope, was free. You wrapped your heart in silence and returned to the act, the smile, the lean, the whisper that made them believe. Because in the end, every part of you could be sold, even the part that still believed deep down that one day someone might not ask for anything, might just stay. But you knew better. You always did. There was a moment when you noticed it, subtle, silent, undeniable. The glance that used to linger now passes over. The compliment you could predict like the sunrise, gone. A younger girl laughs louder in the next room, and the client follows the sound. You're still standing where you always stood, still the same voice, the same body, the same performance. But something's changed, and no one tells you when it happened. You just know. In a place where beauty is currency, time is a debt collector with sharp teeth. The skin softens, the lines around your mouth deepen, your eyes lose their shine, not from age, but from what they've seen. You've memorized every trick, every angle, every tone of voice that once worked, and now none of it lands the same way. You dress brighter, you paint your face harder, you smile wider, but the men want newness, not history. At first, you try to fight it. You whisper that you still have it, that whatever it was, it hasn't gone. You flirt a little bolder. You lower your price. You offer more for less. And that's when you feel the edge, not of rejection, but of erasure, because nothing is crueler than being looked through. Some leave before it gets worse, if they can, if they've saved enough, if they haven't, if no one owns them. They slip out of the brothel like ghosts, vanish into the city, and no one speaks their name again. Others stay, and that's when the second life begins. You become something else. Maybe you start tending the oil lamps, washing the linens, prepping the rooms. The younger girls come to you for advice. They whisper questions they're too proud to ask out loud. You show them how to speak, how to look, how to keep a client without keeping him. Your wisdom is now your value, not your skin, not your smile. And if you're clever and lucky and you've learned how to hold back just enough, you might become the domina, the keeper of the house. You don't work the rooms anymore. You work the door. You watch the coin, manage the schedules, negotiate with the leno, or in rare cases, become one yourself. You were once the merchandise. Now you run the shop. It's not power, not really, but it's protection. You've seen what happens to the girls who don't make the shift, the ones who deny what's changing, who chase youth like a shadow they can't catch. They break. They drink too much. They say yes to the wrong man. They disappear. Some turn to mysticism. You've watched it happen. A girl who once wore bells on her ankles now ties charms above the door, reads wax strips, whispers to bones. The line between performer and prophet is thinner than people think. You knew how to fake love. Now you learn how to fake fate. And sometimes you find something real in it, something ancient and feminine and strong. You sit in corners, casting lots, selling answers to questions men don't dare ask aloud. There's a dignity in that, a reinvention. Not everyone finds it. For many, aging in this life is a quiet rebellion. You were supposed to burn out fast, be used up, be gone, but you didn't disappear. You adapted, you endured, you transformed, and that's a power Rome doesn't write about, because endurance doesn't fit on a statue, but it lives in the shadows, in the corners of brothels, in the laugh lines and steady hands of women who have seen too much and survived anyway. You become invisible to the men who once paid to see you, but you become unmissable to the women who need you. You carry their secrets. You keep them safe. You know when to speak and when to lie and when to slip a girl a coin and say, "Tonight, don't go with him." And when the brothel quiets, when the candles gutter and the last client stumbles out into the night, you sit with your memories like queens hold court, with stillness, with grace, with the quiet pride of someone who turned a sentence into survival. Because youth fades, but wisdom doesn't. and in the world you came from, surviving long enough to grow old, that was the most radical act of all. There were nights when the city outside felt like another world, unreachable, indifferent, filled with faces that looked past you as if you weren't there. And then, behind the curtain, someone handed you a comb. Not a client, not a lover, just another woman with tired eyes and calloused hands who wordlessly untangled your hair as you cried without making a sound. That's when you learned survival in the brothel didn't come from men, it came from each other. The connections between women in places like this weren't written down. They didn't wear names or labels. They weren't always loud, but they were deep, woven from whispered warnings, shared blankets, stolen bread. You didn't plan for them. They happened in the cracks, between shifts, between tears, between bruises that someone else tried to ignore. You didn't always like each other. How could you? You competed. You lied. You snapped out of exhaustion. But when the pain hit, when the client was cruel, when the fever wouldn't break, it wasn't the Leno who stayed up with you. It wasn't the city magistrate who noticed when you went quiet. It was her, the woman who'd once stolen your best robe, who now sat beside you, wiping your face with a damp cloth and whispering, "Breathe." There were inside jokes only the girls knew, rituals, little gestures of comfort passed like secret code, a hand squeezed before a difficult client, a splash of oil rubbed into sore joints, a borrowed shawl when your own had been taken. These moments stitched you together in ways no man ever could. Sometimes those bonds went deeper. Affection, in a place built on illusion, was dangerous and sacred. You learned to fake desire with men, but with her it was real. A shared glance across the corridor, a stolen kiss behind a curtain, two tired bodies curled against each other, not for coin, but for warmth. No audience, no performance, just presence, just quiet. These relationships weren't always romantic. Often they weren't. But when they were, they existed in a space beyond shame. Because who else could understand you so fully? Who else knew the sound of your real laugh? Not the one you used on clients, but the one that escaped when you forgot to protect yourself. Who else saw the parts of you that hadn't yet hardened? Some girls called it love. Others didn't name it at all. Words didn't matter. What mattered was knowing someone would notice if you disappeared. That when your voice shook, someone would reach for your hand, not to guide you, not to take from you, but to remind you, you are not alone. Even in the darkest houses, you found light in each other. Not always, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to get through another night. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, you were more than what the city said you were. And when someone broke, because someone always did, it wasn't the clients who grieved. It wasn't the magistrates who cared. It was the woman on the next cot. The one who used to braid your hair, the one who knew the lullaby your mother sang, the one who never asked for anything but time. In a world built to silence you, she remembered your name, and when you couldn't carry yourself, she did. That was the truth behind the curtains, behind the laughter and the paint and the coin. Not the clients, not the work, not the lies whispered in candlelight. It was her, the one who saw you and stayed. Even the hardest among them had one, a fantasy, tucked away like a pressed flower in a ledger of grime and coin. They spoke of it rarely, and always with a laugh, too sharp, too practiced. But if you looked close, you'd see the flicker in their eyes, the way their hands paused mid-fold of a sheet. The silence that followed after the joke, it always started the same way. When I get out of here. And then came the story. Some wanted a perfumery, a little shop on a street where sunlight actually reached the floor, where the air didn't stink of sweat and mold, but of lavender, frankincense, or rosewater. They pictured the jars, the labels, the gentle clink of glass. Clients would come in and say, "Madam," not "whore." They'd choose the scents they loved. The girls would mix oils with grace and sell bottles wrapped in ribbon, not bodies wrapped in shame. Others dreamed of Ostia, the port city where the Tiber met the sea. Not glamorous, not wealthy, but free. You could blend in there, disappear, start over, open a tavern or a laundry, marry a sailor who didn't ask too many questions, raise goats, anything but this. One woman talked about becoming a midwife. She knew bodies, didn't she? She'd caught a baby once, alone in a room, while the mother screamed and the world kept spinning. She figured that had to mean something. She imagined helping new life come into the world, instead of surviving in the shadows of what was taken. Even the most jaded had their version. A room of her own. A garden, a dog, a quiet. Not riches, never riches, just peace. Hope was the only thing that didn't cost coin in Rome, and that made it dangerous. It burned under the surface, slow and steady. You couldn't sell it. You couldn't kill it, not entirely. The Leno might beat you. The clients might break you. The city might erase you, but the dream remained. Fragile, luminous, a truth you whispered only to yourself. I'll leave someday, not yet, but someday. You saved coins in secret, tucked beneath floorboards, inside cracked pottery, sewn into the lining of your only cloak. You planned the escape like a lover might plan a meeting. You knew which gates were least guarded, which traders took bribes, which ships left quietly at dawn, and sometimes one of you actually left, gone before the sun rose. No note, no goodbye. Just an empty mat and a ripple of silence. The others would lie and say she found a rich patron, married, became a noble's mistress. But most knew better. She ran. She gambled her life on the one currency no man could tax, her will. The brothel didn't mourn. The work continued. But behind closed doors, someone smiled. Because even if she didn't make it, even if she was caught or broken or brought back in chains, the idea that someone could escape was everything. It made the pain bearable. It made the nights shorter. It gave rhythm to the lie you told yourself each time you washed blood from a sheet. This is not forever. It didn't matter if it was true. It only mattered that it felt real. Hope, in the end, was the final illusion and the most necessary one. It didn't dress in silk or smile like a client. It was quiet, stubborn, and glowing. And no matter how much they took from you, they could never take that. Because as long as you believed, even a little, that one day you'd leave this room, this street, this life, you were still free. Rome built its glory in stone. Statues of emperors, generals, and gods lined the roads and watched from temple heights. Their faces were chiseled into eternity, frozen in pride, in power, in polished marble. But not hers. She was never carved, not once, not even in the corners of fountains or the pedestals of forgotten villas. The woman who warmed the empire's nights, who carried its secrets, who bled for its stability, was absent from the marble record. Not because she didn't matter, but because she wasn't meant to be remembered. History prefers the victorious, the clean, the chosen. It has no place for a woman who slept behind a curtain, who used honey and oil to soften the sounds of survival, who whispered fake pleasure into the ears of senators and prayed to gods with no altars. Her face didn't decorate coins. Her name wasn't etched on tombs. She was erased before she could be written. But the city remembered her differently, not in marble, but in walls. If you want to hear her voice, go to the Lupanaria. Not the grand houses of senators, but the tight, sweating corridors of brothels carved into the underbelly of Rome. Look past the dust, past the mold, read the walls. The graffiti is still there, centuries later, scratched by iron nails or soot-dipped fingers. Crude, yes, but honest. Some inscriptions were left by clients, boasts, lies, desperate odes. Others were jokes, vulgar poems, threats. But sometimes, if you looked closely, if you listened hard enough, you found her. A sentence, a name, a plea, a line that said, "I was here, I mattered." You won't find her in the official records. The census noted her profession, not her voice. The ledgers recorded her tax, not her dreams. The laws outlined how she could be used, not who she was. But the walls never lied. They caught her laughter, her anger, her defiance. They heard her cry into straw mattresses and sing under her breath when she thought no one was listening. She didn't write epics. She didn't lead armies. But she held Rome in ways its heroes never did. She bore its weight in her body. She hid its shame in her silence. She carried its hunger, its loneliness, its violence, without statues, without honor, without a single holiday in her name. And still, she endured. The poets sometimes caught glimpses of her, Juvenal's biting lines, Martial's mocking verses, Horace's veiled nods. They painted her as a symbol, never a person, a metaphor for corruption, a cautionary tale. Even when they noticed her, they spoke around her, never to her, and yet she persisted, between the lines, behind the verses. In the back rooms of history, she kept breathing. Today, we walk through marble ruins and imagine Rome's glory, but we rarely ask, who cleaned those halls? Who fed the fires? Who stood behind the curtain while senators debated morality? Whose name was whispered and then forgotten? She was there, not in the Senate, not on horseback, but in the foundation, holding it all together one night at a time. And when it crumbled, when the empire fell into dust, her story remained in the cracks, in the corners, in the places men forgot to erase. There are no statues of her, but the walls still speak, quietly, persistently. She was here, and she was never truly gone. Beneath the weight of centuries, under the ruins and rubble and romantic lies we like to tell about ancient Rome, their faces still wait, not carved in marble or etched in gold, but scratched into crumbling stone and fading paint. Not perfect, not noble, but real, alive, human. They weren't myths, they weren't metaphors, they weren't shadows cast by the greatness of men. They were women who lived and breathed and hurt and laughed, who walked barefoot through alleyways slick with wine and mud, who smeared on rouge and practiced smiles in bronze mirrors cracked down the middle, who learned how to flirt with a soldier, fake a moan for a senator, and hide tears in a crowded bathhouse. They weren't victims, though they were hurt. They weren't criminals, though they were judged. They weren't saints, though they gave mercy to others when none was given to them. They were survivors, resilient, stubborn, clever. They adapted because they had to. They made homes out of cages and rituals out of ruins. And in a world that treated them like coin and shadow, they made themselves visible the only way they could, by leaving traces behind. Graffiti was their testimony, a declaration, scratched in haste or painted in hope, saying, I was here, not a goddess, not a slave, not a monster, just a woman, with a name, a voice, a body that felt pain and joy, a mind that dreamed of something more. Modern history tried to forget them, tried to wrap them in euphemism or dismiss them with a footnote. But the truth refuses to stay buried. The closer we look, the more we realize they weren't a side note to Rome. They were Rome, its nights, its secrets, its hidden rhythm. Behind every stone road and temple column was a woman who scrubbed the blood away. Behind every political decree was a brothel that helped fund the economy. Behind every public oath was a private transaction in the dark. These women weren't outside the city's story. They were woven through it, thread by thread. They weren't waiting for rescue. They weren't broken dolls in need of pity. What they wanted, what they fought for, was space, safety, maybe even softness, but above all, recognition, to be seen. And now, centuries later, we can see them if we're willing to look past the marble, if we dust off the parts of history that were too inconvenient for official memory, if we stop asking, what did she do, and start asking what was done to her and how did she rise anyway. What we find is not a gallery of shame, it's a mosaic of humanity. Yes, there was suffering, yes, there was violence, but also laughter shared between curtains, loyalty stronger than law. Secret dreams whispered in the dark, the quiet bravery of making it through one more day. They were more than the names scratched onto walls. They were more than statistics in a census scroll. They were more than what men called them. They were flesh and thought and stubborn will. They carried pain without letting it define them. They loved without always being loved in return. And somehow, they endured in a world designed to forget them. Now, finally, we remember. Not with statues, but with stories. Not with marble, but with truth. And in that, they live again, not as symbols of shame or tragedy, but as proof of what it means to survive when survival itself was an act of rebellion.